video on. It'd be wonderful to see you again and Susan. And today is a special program of Lunch and Learn because we're going to be devoting it to Lag BaOmer. There's Marshall Tobin. So I've got two past presidents on the congregation on the Lunch and Learn, and Janet, who is a former executive director. Three. Mel, you were president. So I've got. I better be pretty good today. Anyway, so let's go ahead and do a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You've sanctified us with mitzvot, and you've commanded us to engage with words of Torah. So as people are still coming in, let's go ahead and speculate. Now, it was asked earlier, so what's the deal with the bonfires behind my head and Yoni's? What are we doing with that?
Celebrating Lag BaOmer.
Yeah, but so what's the whole deal with the bonfires?
I think it's a protest.
Book burning. No.
Not book burning, for sure, not book burning. But Lag BaOmer, as we're going to be looking at some of the texts, again, this week's Torah portion actually talks about the Sefirat Omer, counting the Omer, and tonight begins the 33rd day, which is Lag BaOmer. And it does have some significance, probably more significance if you live in Israel, and more to the point in the Galil around the Kinneret, around Meron or Tzfat. But regardless, throughout Israel, people be getting out the mangal, the grills, and having bonfires, and it's a time of music, of ushperen, of haircuts for children, and a lot of interesting traditions, which we'll get into. But I wanted to see if someone has some favorite Lag BaOmer memories. Not a one. Okay, well, that gives us a prompt to go to our text. So in this week's Torah portion, Omer, and chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus gives us an entire list of the major religious observances by way of the festivals, of course, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as well as little mention of Rosh Hashanah, although it doesn't call Rosh Hashanah, it's rather Yom Teruah, a day of sounding the shofar, and of course then Yom Kippur. But in its description from Pesach, from Passover to Shavuot, it mentions the specific tradition of counting the Omer. And those of you who have been watching our services or looking at your Jewish calendars, it'll have on the Jewish calendar little references to, I don't know, that comes up, what day it is. So today, right now, is the 32nd day, and that's then tonight we'll have the 33rd. So let's go ahead and look at that text. Whoops. Get to the very top. Okay, so in the 9th verse of chapter 23, and I'll make this a lot larger for everyone to be able to read. Good, how's that? It says quite simply the basic commandment of counting the Omer. And would someone just read that first part for me?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Jerry.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving to you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate the sheaf before the Adonai for acceptance on your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after the Sabbath."
Good. So what you find here then is this word Omer, and I've highlighted it a couple of times in the Hebrew. And he will lift up, the Kohen will lift up the Omer, or the measure, the sheaf, a certain amount of, it was the barley harvest. That's the spring harvest. Sometimes they call it the winter wheat, which is inappropriate. It's because it grows for the most part in the latter part of winter and is harvested in the spring into the early summer. And the key halachic passage here, which we're not going to focus on because it's a whole different issue, is this term mimocharat haShabbat. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of it, of what that means. Mimocharat haShabbat, machar means tomorrow. Mimocharat haShabbat is the day after the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath could be Shabbat, i.e. the seventh day. So the day after the seventh day, the day after Shabbat, would be Yom Rishon, the first day, or we call it Sunday. There were groups within Israel, specifically the Sadducees and others, who said Mimocharat HaShabbat should very well be Sunday, i.e. we should start counting the Omer from the Sunday after the Shabbat that falls in Passover. And that could be the first day of Passover, or it could be the fifth day of Passover, whatever. And the Pharisees and then later the rabbis ruled differently. They said, no. Shabbat here doesn't mean the seventh day. Rather, Shabbat in this context refers to a day of rest. That means that it is a holy day because it is listed within the 23rd chapter of Leviticus that there are many days in which you will have lo ta'asu malacha. You will not do any form of work on that holy day, whether it's Yom Kippur or Yom Teruah, the day of sounding, Rosh Hashanah, or the first day of Passover, etc. So since that was a day of rest, that's why they called it Shabbat, but not Shabbat in the seventh day of the week, Shabbat, but rather Shabbat being a day of rest because it's the festival. And that difference of opinion is significant. And we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, is because when there's a challenge from one to the other group within Judaism, they're all B'nai Yisrael, when there's a challenge of calendar, i.e. when are we observing Passover? When are we observing Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or any of the other observances? If you come up with a different opinion because your group has its own religious teachings, religious traditions, and we may be children of Israel, and yet you follow that teaching which puts the observance on a different day than this other group of Jews, all of a sudden we have split into sects that are no longer communicating each other, no longer observing with one another. And we don't take that so, it seems for us, because we've had well over 2,000 years of Pharisaic and then rabbinic teaching, which has given us things like calendars that say, okay, here's the day of this observance and here's the day of that observance, and we're all on the same page. This one may be Orthodox, this one may be Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, this one may be Reform or conservative, or this one may be secular. But we all know when Passover is, right? By the way, is there some similar situation within Christianity in which they will observe a major festival on a different day?
Christmas.
Yes. Go ahead,
Christmas.
Mark, go ahead.
Christmas, they had celebrated the 9th of our new year, and then as opposed to, that's the Orthodox Christians, as opposed to the everyday Christians. That's the wrong term for that, but they celebrated on the 25th of December.
Right. That's perfect. That's exactly right. The schism that we had between Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity, breaking it up into that which was dominated by Rome and that which was dominated by the Eastern or Orthodox churches, makes it so that they are not observing Christmas on the same day or Easter on the same day, right? We have avoided that in Judaism because of the dominance of rabbinic Judaism. That was not the case 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, within the Rheins household, because we got Susan doing her congregation and I'm doing my congregation, and Sammy's right now on an HUC call with his classes, and he's preparing for his congregation. And so we're all doing this. And so Jacob, who's the one non-rabbinic oriented person, says, makes fun of us. He says, okay, guys, go do your Judaisms, right? Your Judaisms. which it's sort of a joke. But if you look at the work of the late great historian, scholar, Talmudic scholar Jacob Neusner would make reference to Judaisms, i.e., we know very well that there were different groups of Jews who were significant, not just Pharisees, which later became rabbinic, but also Sadducees, also Essenes, also the Sicarii, also various nationalist groups, and Hellenistic groups, which you might call Apikoursim or whatever. They, after Epicurean, i.e. they followed some of the Greek teachings. So we had all kinds of different groups of Jews, and they were on their different calendars. So that's why this one little piece was so significant, and why it is significant for us that though we're Reform and here in the United States, we're still cognizant of and observant of a tradition that is beloved in Israel, and especially beloved by Haredi Jews and by Hasidic Jews, because they follow Rabbi Shimon and the Kabbalistic teachings. So any questions about that before we go back to the text? You're just stunned into silence, right?
How does Shabbat Gadol get in there then? That couldn't have anything related to this, because we wouldn't have Shabbat Gadol until almost the end of the Yom counting days.
I don't think you're referring, because Shabbat Gadol is that great Sabbath that comes before Pesach, with all the laws of Passover. So,
okay,
right. And it was simply great because the rabbis kept yammering on, and no one could get home in time for dinner. So it was probably a euphemistic way of saying, oh, it's the great Shabbat. No, they meant it's the long one, because everyone's coming home late from services. We don't do that at Temple Sinai. All right, so let's get back to our piece. So anyway, so go ahead, Jerry, will you finish up this little...
Sure. And the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to Adonai. On the same day you shall hold a celebration. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall not work at your occupations. This is a law for all time in all your settlements throughout the ages. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Adonai, am your God.
Good. And so from that, then we get that tradition of counting the 7 weeks of days from the day after the Passover Seder, as was ruled by the rabbis. And then on the 50th day, it's the festival of Shavuot. And it's interesting that we have almost not exactly, but almost a perfect repetition of what was written just 4 chapters earlier in last week's Torah portion, chapter 19 of Leviticus, saying that you shall not harvest all the way and glean all of your harvest. Rather, you shall leave it for the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And you might ask then, well, why is that repeated? Why is that emphasized? And again, the Torah doesn't give us the explanation, but that leaves it for us to fill in the blank. Why would it repeat that mitzvah, that mindset about how we should harvest?
I think they're trying to impress the importance of that particular habit.
Right. So what's the mindset that we might have if I have spent through the winter plowing my field, getting it ready, then planting the seed, and then making sure that the weeds are out and the animals don't get it, and I water it, and I finally harvest it, and I bring it to market, right? I've been schlepping all year long for, say farmers are not usually getting rich until they sell their land. Even then, the profits usually go to the people who lent them the money for the seed and the water. But there might be some hesitancy after you worked so hard and sacrificed so much to say, well, I'm not going to harvest all of my harvest. I'm going to leave it for not my neighbor who's poor, but even a stranger. I don't know this person. They're just coming in and grabbing my food. That's not an easy thing to, it's easy for us to say because we're not out there planning and
I
right?
think they're saying that it's a recognition that, yeah, you put in all the work, but if it wasn't for Adonai, you'd still have nothing.
Go ahead, Mark.
It sort of symbolizes the manna, though, because the manna, we only picked it for 6 days, and the seventh day we let it rest, but we still got enough manna to get through.
That's very nice. It's a nice little midrash. That it's similar to what Jerry had, that everything's coming from God anyway, so leave some for others. Anyone else have a thought? Again, there's no easy answer. It's just easier for us who aren't farmers to say, oh yeah, they should not glean to the corner. All right, let's get back to our text. So just wanted a little, again, with the Omer, as you can imagine, with any kind of presentation of, there has to be some kind of formal ritual. And in the Talmudic tractate Menachot, it talks about exactly what happened. So who would like to passage? This is what happened when someone presented the sheaves of barley harvest on a daily basis. Who would like to read this?
Okay, I'll read.
Thank you, Fern.
How would they perform the rite of the harvest of the Omer? Emissaries of the court would emerge on the eve of the festival of Passover and fashion the stalks of barley into sheaves while the stalks were still attached to the ground, so that it would be convenient to reap them. The residents of all the towns adjacent to the site of the harvest would assemble there so that it would be harvested with great fanfare. Once it grew dark, the court emissary says to those assembled, "Did the sun set?" The assembly says in response, "Yes." The emissary repeats, "Did the sun set?" They again say, "Yes." The court emissary next says to those assembled, "Shall I reap the sheaves with this sickle?" The assembly says in response, "Yes." The emissary repeats, "With this sickle?" The assembly says, "Yes." The court emissary then says to those assembled, "Shall I place the gathered sheaves in this basket?" The assembly says in response, "Yes." The emissary repeats, "In this basket?" The assembly says, "Yes." If the 16th of Nisan occurs on Shabbat, the court emissary says to the assembled, "Shall I cut the sheaves on this Shabbat?" The assembly says in response, "Yes." The emissary repeats, "On this Shabbat?" The assembly says, "Yes." The court emissary says to those assembled, "Shall I cut the sheaves?" And they say to him in response, "Cut." The emissary repeats, "Shall I cut the sheaves?" And they say to him, "Cut." The emissary asks 3 times with regard to each and every matter, and the assembly says to him, "Yes, yes, yes."
Okay, let's pause for just a second because it seems very formalized and a little stiff. So why would you imagine? Because even the Mishnah itself is going to say, "That's weird. Why are they doing that?" And we're going to get to its response. So why do you think they do it that way? Go ahead, Mel.
Are you referring to why they harvest that way, or why they do it on the Sabbath even?
Right, exactly. That's a good point. Mel, can you unmute? There you go.
Is this a Sabbath?
Always.
The day?
This is the Sabbath, the 7th-day Sabbath. So when they say the 16th day of Passover, or because Passover begins as the evening of the 14th is falling into the night into the 15th. So that second day, the Mokorat HaShabbat, this time really is Shabbat. And they say, well, we're not supposed to harvest on Shabbat, should we? And yet this is another mitzvah that dochet Shabbat. This one overrides some of the restrictions of Shabbat. So they say, are you sure? They go, yeah, we're sure. And so they cut. So that's a a repetition to making sure, yes, okay, that they're all in agreement, but it seems so formal about the other things, about this basket. What do you mean this basket? We've decorated this basket. It's got our name on it, right? Why should you have to ask 3 times about the basket or about the sickle? I'm going to use this sickle, not that sickle.
Everything has to be just perfect, and everyone has to be in agreement.
Right. There you go, in agreement. But here's the word. We don't know the answer. The Mishnah is going to ask, and it's going to give a specific response. But that's where the midrash, that's the engagement with the text. We have to think about what are the things that we formalize? What are the things that we sign in triplicate? Well, when you buy a car, you buy a house, right?
Usually possessions, important possessions.
Right. You know, I was, if you go to a restaurant, do they give you a single receipt when you sign it? What do they give you?
Carbon copy.
Right. You got the merchant's copy, the customer's copy, and then there's this third copy. I'm never sure what I do with the third copy, right? What are you supposed to do with a third copy? Because the one has where the tip is for the merchant, and the tip may be for my records, but why the third copy? Okay, that's what they have. There's a tradition, you know, Kaka said.
What
Right?
gets me, then they say they're green, but they have 3 copies.
3 copies. And if you go to a place like, gosh almighty, like a Walgreens,
Right.
I mean, the receipts like this. Okay. So we love certain formalities, but here it is with the procedure of the harvest. Now, remember what it said with that if your town is going to be the one presenting the harvest. Now, again, not everyone just lived near Jerusalem. You had to have designated emissaries. So this one comes all the way from the Galil. This one came from maybe from Beersheba. They have to schlep. And so it's not just your little town. It may be a number of little towns all getting together and say, okay, we're all going to do this together. We're all in agreement. We are all in agreement that this now represents us, and that we are all in agreement that this group is going to represent us, bring this to Jerusalem. I think that's the key. Because that's where we all are as Jews. We're not just Denver Jews. We're not just American Jews. We're Jews on the larger platform of the world. And so not to be sectarian, not to be divided, we need everyone to come together and say, are we all on the same page? We're all on the same page. So let's see what the Mishnah has.
Rabbi?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. But this is a minor point, but a thought that I just had. It would really be a way to heighten the drama of the ritual, building up the emotional impact. I mean, I can just envision the chant, the responses getting louder and with more fervor, and it would be kind of cool, really.
I agree. I think most certainly. And some of those formal steps do add to the drama. You know, you think about maybe the presentation of the rings for a wedding, or things that are really important. A little formality adds a heightened sense of the experience. Nice contribution, Laurie. Thank you. So this is what the Mishnah said. So I'm going to move this down. So the Mishnah said, Fern, why don't you finish that off?
Mishnah asks, why do I need those involved to publicize each stage of the rite to that extent? The Mishnah answers, it is due to the Bethusians, as they deny the validity of the oral law and would say there is no harvest of the Omer at the conclusion of the first festival day of Passover, unless it occurs at the conclusion of Shabbat. The publicity was to underscore that the 16th of Nisan was the proper time for the Omer harvest.
Right, exactly. So the Boethesians are those who were sectarians. They were sectarians from the point of view of the rabbis, because the rabbis believed in the Mishnah. They believed in the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, which ultimately became the Talmud. But not all of the groups of Judaisms believed in that. Certainly the Sadducees, who were the Kohanim, the high priests, and the priestly class in Jerusalem before the Common Era, they did not ascribe to the oral traditions of the rabbis. One of the things I don't want to go into this whole piece here. Some are saying that the Boethesians may be from Beth Asiah or the Essenes. That may be the case. There was another piece, Jastrow, great scholar of Talmudic scholarship, said that the Mimochalat Shabbat, the day after the Sabbath, refers to the day after the Seder. And his thing was, Jastrow's piece, which I thought was great, that all of the other major festivals that we have fall on a full moon. Who saw the full moon just a couple days ago? It was gorgeous, right? Gorgeous. But what happened to the full moon? Well, we can see each other, right? It's God's great nightlight. So if I'm having a pilgrimage festival, that's a good thing because they didn't have street lights back then. And you can only carry a torch so far. So having a big moon, full moon out there to make it easier to see and to walk to my destination in the evening is fabulous. So Passover begins as the 14th turns into the 15th. That's a time of the full moon. And Sukkot, the other great festival, is on the 14th. Turns into the 15th day of Tishrei. That's a full moon. But Shavuot, it's not on a full moon. So what's the deal, right? And the Jastrow speculates, and probably so, we have some evidence here from the Talmudic passages, that there were those, like the Boethesians, like the Sadducees, who said, no, don't count from the day after Passover, count from the Sabbath after Passover, in which case it gets us to the time of Sivan being the 14th and 15th, i.e. Shavuot would be on a time of the full moon. Wow. So the Sadducees had their own wisdom, but the problem that the rabbis had with the dispute by the Boethesians, that they would have a different observance for the harvest, a different observance then as counting the Omer would also mean a different time in which they would have Shavuot. This one says it's on the 14th and 15th day of Sivan. Others said, no, it's going to be on the 6th day of Sivan. All of a sudden, we're observing festivals on different days. And what happens then? We're no longer on the same page. We are at battle with one another. And a battle with one another is the key then to, as we make a transition to Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is on that 33rd day of Omer. And there was something that you may have read or have learned over the years that we don't do from the beginning of the counting of the Omer all the way to the 33rd day of the Omer. What is that?
Cut your hair.
We don't cut your hair.
Shave.
Right? We don't cut our hair, except for today. What's another thing we don't do?
Weddings.
Weddings. That's a big deal, right? Weddings are a huge thing. And there are other traditions as well, things that you don't do during this town of the Omer, including music. There are people who won't play instrument music during a time of the Omer. So other restrictions as well. But why? The Torah has nothing about don't do certain things like that during the counting. It has nothing like that at all. Those only happened after. Now, why? And so for that, we go back to another passage in Talmud, and that's from Yevamot. So I'm going to get to that. But anyone else have anything to share on that what we talked about so far? Mark, please.
I took a class, Introduction to Kabbalah, and they made a big deal about whether you count down from the first day to the last, or up from the last day, or vice versa. And he made a big deal of it, but I never understood it until I asked him the next year. I said, "Are we going to count back from up or down this year?" He says, "You're the only person that remembered anything from that class."
Well, if you have the same kind of dispute when it comes to Hanukkah as well, right? Do we count one candle to 2 to the 3 to the 4 candles, or do we go 8 down? And so they're both viable logically, but the tradition was that we always add to sanctity. We don't decrease from sanctity. Yoni, did you have something you wanted to share with that too? Okay.
Oh no, I was just adjusting my glasses, I think.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say, whatever way you go, you get there.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and you know, in our family, we dig it. I always liked counting it. First of all, I spent almost a year, a good amount of time in Tzfat, and so I had that community and that sensibility. But they, so counting the Omer, I thought was sort of a normal. But I was always taken by even Orthodox rabbis who would try to bribe their children and especially their grandchildren, as saying, I've got this financial reward if you counted every single day. Did you count today? Did you count? And so, because it's easy to forget, if you're davening Shachrit Mincha Mariv, then you get into that routine and you're just doing your prayers, and it's easy all of a sudden to forget. Now you can count later, but you can't count earlier. Remember, it said that it has to be from the evening time. So if you davened a little bit earlier, because you could, and Mincha Mariv, you shouldn't have counted the Omer until after the sunset. So anyway, don't feel bad if you say, I haven't really been counting. Okay, it's not always easy to come into it, but it does. There's something magical to it, because if I'm taking the time every day to count, I'm pausing. I'm considering the significance of this moment, of this day. So let's get to the text again. So this is from Yevamot, and a little passage on Rabbi Akiva, who's going to be riffing on a passage in Kohelet. I want to get to the passage real quick. Kohelet, it says, "In the morning sow your seed, in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you do not know which shall prosper, whether this or that, or whether they are both alike shall be good." And that's from Kohelet. And it means that a person should continue to try to be have children as long as you can, right? So Akiva's riffing on that. It's not just about having children, but it's also about having students. So who would like to read this little piece, because it comes down to why we have Lag BaOmer. Oh, come on.
I can read it.
Yay. Thank you, Roberta.
Rabbi Akiva taught, he's my favorite, except you, Rick, if one studied Torah in his youth, he should study more Torah in his old age. If he had students in his youth, he should have additional students in his old age, as it is stated. In the morning, sow your seed, Kohelet 11:6. They said, by way of example, that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students in an area of land that stretched from Gavat to Antipatris in Judea, and they all died in one period of time because they did not treat each other with respect. And the world was desolate of Torah until Rabbi Akiva came to our rabbis in the south and taught his Torah to them. This second group of disciples consisted of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosei, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua. And these are the very ones who upheld the study of Torah at that time.
Hold on, I'm going to move it up for you. Okay.
Although Rabbi Akiva's earliest students did not survive, his later disciples were able to transmit the Torah to future generations. With regard to the 12,000 pairs of Rabbi Akiva's students, the Gemara adds, it is taught that all of them died in the period from Passover until Shavuot. Rav Hama bar Abba said, and some say it was Rabbi Chia bar Avin, they all died a bad death. The Gemara inquires, what is it that is called a bad death? Rav Nachman said diphtheria.
So who remembers in what era that Akiva died?
He died in 1492. Wasn't he burned at the stake in Spain?
No,
I thought he
It
was
was like one CE or something, I thought, when the Romans, right?
It was
Yeah,
by the Romans.
He was flayed. It was flayed by the iron flayer.
Right.
He was, say that again?
The method of his death was flaying. They had a thing on hinges which would go back and forth and cut your skin off a little at a time.
Yeah. He was flayed to death because he was one of the leaders of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 132 of the Common Era. Now, there was the great revolution against Rome in the year 67 to 70 of the Common Era that led ultimately to the destruction of Jerusalem. 2 generations later, there was some thought that even under Emperor Hadrian, that there would be a rebuilding of the temple. They said, we can do it. We can cooperate. Let us have our temple back. Let us have our land back. And he was wavering back and forth. He ultimately decided no, because he wanted, interestingly, ironically, he wanted, much like Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek 200 years earlier, 300 years earlier, to have one united Roman Empire that had no disputes, same religion, we're all on the same page. And these Jews are particular. They have their own faith. They have their own traditions. They don't participate in our national sacrifices and our tradition. They don't come to our games. They are separatists. And therefore, we're going to stamp that out. So when he decided against the building of that temple in the middle of the 2nd century, i.e. 130 something of the Common Era, there was a revolution. He ultimately renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, trying to say we're going to get rid of it. And then he also renamed Judea Palestina, which unfortunately entered the annals of history and is as a way of denying our connection to a homeland ever since. It was a punitive move by Hadrian. But at the time, there was some thought maybe he would allow us to rebuild this temple. So when he didn't, there was a revolution. And Bar Kokhba, it's Shimon ben Bar Kokhba, led some revolutionaries that had great success early against Hadrian's troops. Rabbi Akiva said, wow, look at the success that we're having. Maybe this is the time of the Mashiach. Maybe Bar Kokhba is that Mashiach. And famously, his colleague said, Akiva, you'll be long gone, and the Mashiach will still not be here. We've gone over that passage before. So Akiva was one of these revolutionaries. And when the Romans captured him, they weren't just going to put him to death. As Mark said, they tortured him, and they had a public torture of Akiva. Some very famous passages in which he then, with his last breath, was uttering the Shema. And his students said, Rabbi, even while they're torturing you, you're singing the Shema, right? And he said, I always wanted to say with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my being. Now I know what that means. And his final words was Achad, with God as one, and that's when he died. So Akiva and his students were a part of this revolutionary group that were revolting against Rome, and they suffered. Now, the rabbis later on said, well, it may have been diphtheria, it may have been croup, maybe some other kind of disease, a plague. Interesting. And we're not sure why they sort of hedged their bet on that. Why didn't they come right out and say, well, Akiva was fighting this war against the Romans? And that's for us to think about. Some might say that, well, the rabbis sort of covered that up a little bit because they were still under Roman domination, or it was either Jews were either living under Roman domination at the time of the writing of the Talmud or Persian domination. And in any case, Jews had to watch their steps a little bit more, and they were maybe self-censoring. Not exactly sure why, but this idea that the plague stopped, the killing stopped on the 33rd day of Lag BaOmer is one of the reasons that we have this celebration, and we also stop our mourning tradition. But there's another one as well, because there was one of the characters that was mentioned, one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Remember, he was one when all of his earlier students died. Rabbi Akiva went down and he taught Rabbi Shimon. Let's see the connection with Rabbi Shimon. I'm going to get down. Well, I'm going to get down to here. This is about Rabbi Shimon, a little historical background. Who would like to read this?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Alan.
Rabbi Shimon Bahu, hey,
Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai.
I missed the bar. That, excuse me, is created by some to be one of the earliest teachers of Kabbalah, mystical interpretations of the Torah, the Kabbalah, and is the author of classic texts of Kabbalah, the Zohar. He taught his disciples to make the day of his death as the day of my joy, because the final day of righteousness, a person's earthly life, marks the point of which all the deeds, teachings, and work. I just lost my place.
I'm sorry. Work, achieve, right here.
Thank you. Achieve the zenith of their impact upon our lives. Since Rabbi Shimon died on Lag Omar, he celebrated his life. Lag Omar also commemorates another joyous event. The Talmud relates that in the weeks between the Jewish holidays of Passover and Shavuot, a plague raged among disciples of the great sage of Rabbi Akiva, who we all know was a teacher of Rabbi Shimon. Because they did not act responsibly towards each other, these weeks are therefore observed as a period of mourning, with various joyous activities prescribed by law and custom. On Lag Omer, the death ceased. Thus, Lag Omer also carries the theme of loving, respecting one's fellow
Jews, Ahavat Yisrael.
Thank you.
Yeah. Since this is the day.
Okay, since this is the day of the joy of Rabbi Shimon, by your hope. Could you say that again?
Bar Yochai.
There are major festivals in Moron, the mountain village, in the Mount Israel where it is buried, with tens of thousands of pilgrims pouring in from all corners of the world to replace together in unity. It is customary to spend the day outside, enjoying the natural beauty of God's world. During these outings, it is customary to play the bows and arrows. And in Denver, we have the beautiful mountains.
Yeah, good. So the bows and arrows, I'm not going to get to my other teaching, because I'm going to have to save that for this video message that I'm going to be recording with Yoni later on. So if you want to find out something about the bows and arrows, you have to tune in later to the piece. But going outside for the bonfires, because when you have a bonfire, you have a kum sitz. Everyone comes around, you sing a song, someone brings a guitar, or in the old days they have a kinnor, a lyre, or whatever, and they would play songs, and they'd have games, and young people, of course, would meet each other, and there'd be lots of dancing and whatever carrying on. And it's a day of coming together for a barbecue. One of the things that is traditional, if you go to Moron, people put potatoes on the stick and they put it in the bonfire, and you have roasted potatoes, which Israel is an exporter of potatoes. Who knew? But now you know. It's a wonderful treat. Now, what about the haircut? Why should we have a haircut? Not during the first part of the counting the Omer, but on the 33rd day we will. Roberta, was that you clicking, or no?
Oh,
Anybody?
Sorry.
Okay. How do you feel when you go to the barber or the beauty shop?
You feel great.
Yeah, right. No, I've not been to the beauty shop, but in the barber shop, they make it, and maybe they put a little bit of cologne on there. Your skin's braced, your hair is looking good. You go, hey, this is not so bad, right? You're walking out, you feel good about yourself. And so the day of getting a haircut that's a nice day. But you wouldn't do that when you're mourning. And you're in time of mourning, what do you do? Go ahead, Arnie. You said, what are some of the mourning practices? What don't you do when you're in a time of mourning?
Cut your hair.
Well, what else don't you do?
Listen to
You don't-
music.
Hey, don't celebrate.
Shave.
Hey, don't celebrate.
Right. Well, okay, right. So you limit your personal hygiene you want to do, but personal beautification. So one of the traditions, you cover a mirror, right? You cover the mirror. You don't wear so much makeup. Why? Because you're not on display. You're not celebrating. Fern, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not doing anything. I'm trying to post something and now I can't get back in.
Rabbi, I was going to say, for people like me, a haircut is a challenge.
Well, but still, there was something nice. When you went to the barber shop, in the old days, you go to the barber shop and there were some friends. There's a little bit of kibitzing. You see some old friends and you catch up and maybe the barber knows who you are. And and it's a very upbeat kind of an experience. It's not something you do when you're in a time of grieving and mourning. So this is a definite sign that you are not mourning any longer. There's a wonderful tradition called ushperen. What's that?
You cut your hair when you're 3 years old.
Yeah. So go ahead, Mark. Tell us what you know.
Oh, I just remember mine. I had 3 uncles that were younger than my mother. And I just remember them taking me. My grandfather had a grocery store and next door was a barber shop. And I remember they were taking me in there and they were arguing about how much I was going to cry because every kid had cried their first thing. And my mother didn't come probably because of that. But it was no problem. I remember the barber's name was Paul.
Did they give you a treat?
Yeah, you got a lollipop. Yeah. With hair up.
Right. I love it. The barbers used to always give a treat. But you think about that's pretty unhygienic too. But who knows? As a kid, hey, here's a lollipop. Stick this in your mouth. But anyway, those traditions then also on the 33rd day, there would be weddings. Now here's interesting. If you look into the conservative movement's law committee rulings, they start off by saying, well, from the 33rd day of the Omer onward, weddings will be permitted. Eventually they said, you know what, all this whole tradition, and then they repudiated the whole thing. They said, you know what, we're going to do weddings throughout the throughout the entire time of the Omer, because that's 50 days. That's almost 2 months in which we aren't having weddings. And that's not such a good thing. So, but others will say, you know what, we're not going to do it for the first 33, and from the 33rd day on, we will do it. Anybody remember any of those traditions?
A lot of premature babies born if they couldn't have weddings for 7 weeks.
Yeah, maybe there was some dancing going on. Go ahead, Jerry. Go ahead.
No, but I had that with my son. He got married on May 9th. And that was a concern, is would a rabbi marry him?
Oh, he got married on May 3rd.
May 3rd, I'm sorry, of 09, of 09. but that was...
A man should never quote a date in front of his wife. It never works. We're never right. Thank you, Natalie.
I was close.
That's all we are. We're close. Okay, we get a lollipop. God bless us. Mommies remember. Good. Anyway, so those are the traditions that we had. But I thought going back to that piece, then we started off with, remember that very formalized ritual of, is this the sickle? Yes. Are you sure this is the sickle? Is this the basket? Is that the basket? Because everyone needed to be on the same page. Again, we're not just talking this little town, but as all the little towns came together, because it was a big deal to send some small group with their barley sheaf up to Jerusalem. It was an honor, but it was expensive and it was a lot. It was an investment, and you wanted that to lift up everyone's spirit. And so to do that, you had everyone come together. Everyone had to be on the same page. we couldn't have this one saying, well, I'm not going to bother bringing in the Omer or bringing the barley sheaves to Jerusalem because we're observing Shavuot on a different day, right? Or we're saying that no, it doesn't dochet Shabbat. It doesn't override Shabbat. We're following a different tradition, and the rabbis were worried about that. And that piece that we find in the Talmud was that there were disputes, and it was one of the reasons they were always looking for some kind of justification, reason why we were vulnerable to the plague, vulnerable to the Romans, vulnerable to whatever enemies outside or within. And it came down to that they didn't have Ahavat Yisrael. They didn't love one another. But it was rather sinat. There was a sinat chinam. There was a hatred that they had. And what was the hatred based on? Well, the hatred is based on that you follow that rabbi and I follow this teacher. That I have this tradition and you have that tradition. And that we emphasize the differences for one another as opposed to that which drew us in commonality. And that formalized ritual wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. And even the great Rabbi Akiva's students suffered because they were separatists. There was Judaisms back then. There was a terrible revolution back then. Arnie, go ahead.
I'm just from listening to you and think of our common era now. Are we on that same path? I mean, think about it. I mean, you can't get two congregations to agree anymore. Never mind how many denominations are we sporting now and spinning off one a month. So you wonder whether or not what actually was one of the incredible strengths, and we can't hire a pope, which would help. And that's it. That's the rule. Are the path we're on now kind of doing the same thing?
That's a question we need to continually ask ourselves. That's one of the major questions that comes out of a Lag BaOmer. Yes, it's bonfires and playing music and cutting the hair and having dances and all the rest. That's beautiful, but it really comes down to are we devolving as a people? And you can find evidence of that. Truth is, we can find evidence of that in just about every generation, and that's what people of our age get to do. We get to say, see, things are going to hell in a handbasket, and it's all breaking apart. And if you go back at any generation, you'll find the elders shrine Gevalt about how the young people don't understand what we went through, and it's all going to fall apart. God help us, the young people figure it out, and we should stop complaining about them. We should look at ourselves a little bit more as to what we are doing about it. But there, you will find articles coming out with some frequency. For instance, in Israel right now, the dispute as to who's a Jew between, and it's not just between the the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox. We have disputes between the Haredi of that sect, the Haredi of a different sect, the modern Orthodox, and then the whether it's the Mizrahi, the Reformim, the Conservative, Mekodemit, all the different groups are on one another. So there's an article in the Jerusalem Post, where it was the Times of Israel, says, should we even accept, really, I have to find it, should we accept the ultra-Orthodox conversions? And it was just like, just a little soots back. And I suppose it was trying to be clever, but again, it gets to that breaking apart of a sense of community, of a sense of who we can be. Go ahead, Arnie.
Yeah, I'm just for my own interest. Was there ever been a time in the history of Judaism where you would have what we're involved in now? I mean, I'm talking over, say, the last, couple hundred years. Couple hundred years. That's just not in the history. So we are living the experiment, I imagine.
You know what? If you really want to get down to it, things are better now for our people than ever before. I mean, if you You can't raise money on that teaching. so don't quote me when I go fundraising, because you fundraise on Schreigewalt. You fundraise on, oh my God, we're all falling apart, right? You don't get the big donations when, oh, things are going beautifully. No, right? So that doesn't work. Unfortunately, we go crisis. No, hear me out. That things are better now than they ever have been. Well, not only are Jews free and relatively secure here in the United States. Yeah, we point out that anti-Semitism is nothing like it was a generation ago, let alone 3 or 4 generations ago, not only here in the United States, but also in Europe. And we have a free, independent, and strong Israel. Are you kidding? Right? We've never had it as good as we have it right now. But still, yes, there's threats. In every generation, we have to recognize them. We have to deal with them. So let me point out something really positive for a Lag BaOmer. Our community observance for Shavuot will show almost all of the congregations, the major congregations, coming together. Temple Sinai will be there with Temple Emmanuel, which will be there with Hebrew Education Alliance, which will be there with BMH, which will be there with Road of Shalom, which will be there with Judaism Your Way, and Micah, and all the rest. There's a couple of the Orthodox congregations that are not, but the big Orthodox congregation, BMH, is a part of it. And we will all join together for Shavuot services on at the beginning of Erev Shavuot, Tikkun Leil, and for teaching together and for interacting together. And we meet together in the most cooperative way. That is something that, unfortunately, we don't publicize enough of. Arnie.
Yeah, no, I phrased my question wrong. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking of Alan Dershowitz's book, I don't know, The Vanishing Jew. I'm a fan of his. If you read that book, he points out some interesting things, that in the time of peace, assimilation was way up. Hitler should only have known, according to him. Just let them assimilate, let them be free, let them do what they want. They'll disappear. You know what I'm saying? So what worries me in this, like you're saying, how many other cities are doing what Denver's doing? One. Number two is that as this, peace is wonderful, that we've never had it better. But will we withstand the next threat when we're all spread out the way we are now?
We won't know, but that's why we're here, right? That's why we create a community, because you don't take it for chance. You don't say, oh, it'll work out. You build schools, you build the youth, you build synagogues, and you have to not only talk about it, you have to walk it. And that's the beauty of you guys here on a Thursday at noon. We're here learning together. We're learning Torah and learning Talmud, and we're talking. And hopefully then some of this we'll share with a friend. And by the way, we may have 15 or 16 people on this live. But if you look at the people who watch it eventually on Facebook and on our website, it's many dozens, and so it does have an echo. It has waves, and so no, I don't take anything for granted. Maybe we put the bonfire. What does a bonfire do? It creates a beautiful beacon to chase away the darkness. And so we can recognize the dark is there and just tremble in fear, or we can create a bonfire and say, okay, there is the darkness, but there's also light, and we're going to be creators of light. We're going to be those who share that light with those who may be suffering a little bit of trepidation or hopelessness, and give them hope and give them some courage. And that's what we do. That's what we do. How's that? You get a sermon too. Right? All right. So,
I was going to say, Rabbi, that the Jewish community on Sundays, went back in the old days, we got together and we went to Wash Park and we took our walk, and that was almost all the congregations went. And that's a plug for this Sunday. And I also want to say, I may not be able to pronounce some rabbi names, but I do know they're the all-star of rabbis, that group.
Yeah. Denver's grown. So it's hard to get everyone to say Wash Park is our rallying point anymore. For me, it might be Silo Park in Greenwood Village. And that's where when Susie and I are doing our walk, we see an awful lot of Sinai members. So the community's grown and we're spread out, but let us try to find that which unifies us as well. First of all, real quick reminder for the dudes, we have Bible and beers tonight, Brotherhood Bible and beers. And we're going to have, since it's draft night, we're going to have the draft selections of all the top Jews. Who's going to be the number one Jew? You're going to make it Abraham, or is it Moses? Is it Sarah? Is it Esther? We're going to have the first pick, and I'm going to be the Mel Kiper. Right?
Rabbi, I thought you meant draft Guinness.
You can do a draft Guinness too if you want. Linda, what happened?
I just saw your list in the announcements of who you were going to be voting for tonight, and there are a lot of women in the list, but I'm assuming there won't be any women voting at your meeting this evening.
Oh, that's a good question. So here we go. It's Brotherhood Bible and Beers, and we have women's study groups at Susan's last. So I got to give those dudes a chance to do the dude thing. And here's the other thing, Linda. I'm going to talk about the Bible stars, but I'm pretty sure that someone's going to be mentioning who the hell the Broncos selected. so there'll be a little bit of NFL talk too, but maybe we can do an exercise like that. Linda, I'll take that challenge. Maybe we'll do that exercise at a lunch and learn. How do you think?
I was going to say that draft, people like me, I'm a draft dodger. I don't particularly like beer. That's just a chuckle.
That's all right. All right. Hey, Yoni, thank you. Everybody, thank you very much. Happy Lag BaOmer Dama.